Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and I'm tired. I'm very, very tired. I got a good reason to be. I just finished episode 4 of this Cold War opus, 10 episodes, and it was nuts. It just wouldn't write it wouldn't stop writing itself. I was supposed to do maybe 4,500 words. I ended up doing 9,000, but that's par for the course. But in any event, it's awful good. I really liked it. I have to tell you, I didn't know too much about this particular episode dealt with the Korean War. I've known a lot about the Soviets and a lot about you know pretty much everything from Vietnam on, but I mean, I knew the Cold War happened. I knew when it happened. I knew what happened, but I didn't know any of the details. Um, and uh, and I had to spend a lot of time learning those details, and it was just an amazing. What is this? An amazing experience, really. Funny thing about the Korean War, it went 3 years, but pretty much everything happened in the first 4 months, 5 months. By the time the first 5 months were over, everything that happened happened. Um, Busan had happened, Chosin had happened, Incheon had happened, all of it, first 3 or 4 months, and then it just ground on for another 3 years, 2.5 years. One of the many statistics I discovered was that I think it was 33,000 U.S. combat deaths in the Korean War, but only 8,000 before China came in. So the beginning of the war was when all of the interesting stuff happened, and the end of the war was where we took the most casualties. It was fun talking about General Ridgway, though. That was actually kind of cool. I'm sure I'll get a little bit of feedback about having actually mentioned his nickname among the troops. Ridgway was a hugely popular guy, replaced MacArthur in Korea, and he'd been the guy who had converted the 82nd Division into the 82nd Airborne Division, and then he was on the front lines at the Battle of the Bulge. So when he took over in Korea, morale was very poor, and he went around just bucking everybody up. And one of the things he used to do, just as routine, was you never saw him, Ridgway in Korea, never saw him without 2 live grenades clipped to his shirt pockets. 2 of them, ready to go. Live grenades. Pull the pin, throw them at the Chinese hordes, and that earned him the nickname Tin Tits, which I just heard today, and I just thought that was great. Yeah, the whole MacArthur thing with Truman and it's just so strange. The whole war was strange. MacArthur basically, when MacArthur told Truman 3 or 4 days before the Chinese invasion, told him that China wasn't going to come into the war. It was too late. And then 4 days later, the Chinese appeared, having marched at nighttime. And once they were in it, MacArthur said, "All right, so China wanted to commit suicide. That's fine. I want to use nuclear weapons to take out the Chinese air bases across the Yalu in China proper. And then, now that because they just taken Pyongyang, they conquered the north. And then he said, so we'll turn left and we'll go to Beijing and we'll dictate peace terms the way we did with Tokyo 5 years ago. We'll just march on Beijing and we'll knock China out of the war and free the country, and if they give us any trouble, we'll just nuke them on the way." And there's something to be said for that. The one thing, MacArthur was nuts, and MacArthur did inexcusable things in terms of insubordination. Truman summoned him back to the White House. MacArthur refused to go to Washington. But he said he would be willing to meet the president in Wake Island. And Truman went. But this and many other acts, they're just rank insubordination, that's all there is to it. And MacArthur insisted all the way to the end that the decision to use nuclear weapons in Korea was not Harry Truman's decision, it was his decision. He would be the person to decide whether or not to use nuclear weapons on the battlefield. And whether he was right or not about many things, the fact is he was clearly insubordinate and kind of asking for it, kind of nuts. But I've often thought about that particular decision, especially the decision to use tactical nuclear weapons against military targets in China, which didn't have the bomb at the time or nothing like it. China got involved in a war, started killing American soldiers who were defending South Korea, and China is just ramping up our casualties. If there was ever a justified and moral use, when I say moral, I mean avoidance of civilian casualties, for nuclear weapons, that would have been it. You're going to take out military personnel on a flat spot on the frozen plains out there in Mongolia, practically. So I don't know. It's interesting. If he had done it, Eric Blake beat me to it. If we'd listened to MacArthur and done that, used nuclear weapons to keep China out of the war, there would not have been a Vietnam. I'm convinced of this, and there would not have been a Vietnam because the communist adversaries knew that America was serious, that we were serious, and we weren't going to do what we ended up doing, which is fight half wars. Fought a half war in Korea. We didn't use all the weapons we had. Fought a half war in Vietnam, if he had taken that if he had taken that that opportunity, I don't see how that could have been worse than what eventually happened. The Russians had a bomb. We probably, by 1950, we probably had 100 of them. But Russia maybe had a bomb. They detonated the first bomb about 10 months before Korea. And a bomb is not a trivial thing to have, an atom bomb, but they had no means to deliver it. And we did. And so the idea of Russia and China coming into this war, well, China did come into the war, and that's what would have provoked the use of nuclear weapons in the first place. There was never a plan to use them, not a serious plan to use them against the North Koreans, because they didn't have to. But it would have said something very different, and that is, now we're not dicking around here, And then the only question is, if that had happened, would it have essentially demystified nuclear weapons? And over the long run, would that have made a nuclear war more likely? I don't know. I'm beginning to develop a very almost radical theory about the Cold War and about nuclear weapons, and I'm giving it more and more thought. I think it seems increasingly likely to me that everything that we were afraid about in the Cold War just could not have happened. Not that it couldn't have happened technically, and not that the Soviets were bad people, nothing like that. But I don't think anybody would have pulled that trigger. I know you had to act like you would, and you had to assume that the other guy would, but I don't think anybody would. And I don't know, that story of that Russian colonel in 1987 who saw incoming American warheads on his radar, had orders to launch on warning, wouldn't fire them. He knew he'd be shot if he was wrong, and he also probably knew he'd be shot if he was right. He died just a month or two ago. He couldn't believe that was a nuclear attack from the United States, and so he basically withheld the order to launch a counterattack, a nuclear counterattack against the United States. And and he just did it on his own. I don't know what this is. Some kind of white stuff on my black shirt. Anyway, was that guy, was he certainly saved the world. The question is, would other people have pulled the trigger? This is the thing I'm arguing about with myself. Pretty convincing evidence that no matter what Eisenhower said he would do, he had internally decided he wouldn't do it. And I don't know what it is. Not dandruff. It's just some stuff. And maybe it's powdered sugar from a donut I wanted to eat but didn't. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway. All right. So let's. I'd like to keep this relatively brief. We're not going to limit it to an hour like we did last time. But I really am very, very tired. I've been up all night and up a couple nights. Just this incredible volume of reading and writing that had to be done. But that episode is behind me. It's 4 out of 10. I'm 40% of the way. And, and by the way, I don't really want to talk about it too much, obviously, because I haven't really gotten clearance. I don't think it's exactly secret, but it certainly hasn't been really publicized yet. But this one is a podcast only. We did a recording. We've been recording on a really great microphone. But there's not going to be any video. I'm not saying that the Apollo 11 kind of thing won't happen again someday, but it's not going to happen for a while. I think there's some intent to see if we can build up a podcast audience, however, and if that happens, then we might be going back to that video. I love that room. I love that set so much. But that Apollo series was loved it. It was the best thing I ever did. So I don't want anybody to be disappointed, but I'm not disappointed by it. It's storytelling, and as I said, it's only just a short time ago I realized that I'm not in the video business, I'm in the radio business, and so now we're going to find out whether that's accurate or not. Okay, so let's see. We definitely are going to take questions from the BillWhittle.com page. I also put up I did it again. Scott put up a page on the BillWhittle.com, and I got one up on Facebook, so let's see what we get here. I guess we can go to Facebook first, and then I'll play around and see what we can find on the other one. Hang on. Oh, there's a picture of my beautiful wife there on a screenshot. Did I not? Yes. I got to refresh the page. No wonder I couldn't see anything. My God, I was just like, no comments. Sorry, let me fix that. Gray badges will be removed on October 29th. Okay. Here we go. And again, I'll go to the Bill Whittle page after this. Hey, look, it's Rough Riders, unless that's somebody's changed the name. That's a name I certainly don't remember. It's a cool name, though. He's got the number 1 and 2 questions up there just in terms of what's showing, and I'm not going to get into the whole measure of how they select their bloody comments. If there was a simple thumbs up thing and make life easy. It used to be that way, but it's not anymore. So let's see what he says. Hey, Bill, just resubmitting a question from 2 weeks ago during the show. My son Max is 14 and is in the final leg of his glider pilot certification training. He only has spinning and spiral dives and outlanding to complete. Landing out to complete to qualify for his independent operator ticket. You can get your glider license at 14, I think, instead of 16, if I recall correctly. Any tips for him on this and for his move to powered flight training as he wants to join the Air Force upon finishing high school? Thank you. Wow, I love that kind of question. I do remember you mentioning it before. I've said many times that I don't believe in compulsory anything, but if I was a flight instructor, I would highly recommend anybody who wanted to learn how to fly general aviation airplanes that they would start in gliders and that they would stay there long enough to have it do some good. I ended up, by the time I moved into power flight, I want to say it was 82 hours, 83 hours in sailplanes, and probably 200-300 landings, something like that. A lot of short flights on a cold day. Called them sleigh rides. You just take a toe up and then you glide down. There's no lift at all. But as I've said before, and I won't go into too much detail here, the benefits of this are astonishing. You number one, you have to feel how to fly the airplane. You just have to feel it. The only way to determine that you're in lift is to feel it in the seat of your pants. You can feel the plane go up. You can feel one wing go up faster than the other one. So there's that. You have to fly if you're chasing thermals, you have to fly at a 60-degree bank. I've seen general aviation pilots go white knuckle when they exceed 30 degrees. And you have to fly a 60-degree bank, and you have to fly 2 knots, 3 knots above the stall, minimum sink speed. When your first 20, 30, 40, 50 hours in airplanes is flying one without an engine at 60 degrees of bank, 2 knots above stall speed, that fundamental understanding of how the airplane works never goes away, ever. And not only do you get a sense of things like how pitch controls airspeed. Most people think the propeller power controls airspeed, but that's true in jet fighters, but in general aviation airplanes it's very different, counterintuitive. In GA airplanes, pitch controls speed and power controls your altitude. I highly recommend it. And the reason I recommend it more than anything, much more than the skill it gives you in actually flying the airplane, to me, is the fact that it is awful useful in emergencies. It's awfully, 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 awfully useful to have the ability to land an airplane without an engine and know in advance that you can do it. So anyway, I hope that helps. I would, for whatever advice it's worth, I would strongly advise your son to spend as much time in gliders as possible, as opposed to Cessna 172s or something. If he's going to qualify for flight training, he's going to get it anyway. There's the number of people who come into the academy with a glider background, because they start in gliders in the Air Force Academy, at least they used to. The number of people who come in with gliders is minuscule. There's a significant number of applicants and cadets who have some general aviation background. But the reason I flew gliders for as long as I did was as close as I could get to a fighter plane. I mean, this thing was a carbon fiber little demon. It was the size of a bathtub, and no propeller, and you pulled 3-4 Gs and do aerobatics in those things. It was really great, and I don't have to see the propeller, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm flying a jet. Anyway, best of luck to him, and I certainly would love to hear more about the progress as it goes on. Let me see what I can find on the web page here. I forgot how to spell Bill Whittle. I do that all the time. Let's see. Oh, Scotty writes such great headlines. I'm on a horse. I'd be very curious to know if my prediction about Kim Jong-il comes true. I've heard Kim Jong-un. I've heard everybody else say he's going to announce the lifting of the nuclear weapons moratorium and go back to developing weapons. I don't think that's it. I'd be curious to know if I'm right and all of the highly paid experts are wrong. We'll see. Let me have a quick peek here. Where did it go? Scott's got it somewhere here. I always do this. Maybe it would help if I signed into my own website. I don't know if I have the credentials. Let's see what happens now. Anyway, this would be a good time to paint that room that you've been wanting to get to and haven't been able to. Here we go. Come on, baby. Stratosphere Live, where do I go? Anyway, I don't know where we go. You would think I would know by now, but I don't. I'm finding it. Scott's going to ride to the rescue any second now. And a lot of this, honestly, is just being real tired. Scott put up a forum, by the way, for BillWhittle.com members. There's an actual forum there now, and there it is, and it's really fun, and he just keeps adding stuff to it. So that's fantastic. Here it is, groovy picture of me. All right. Let's talk to brother Steve Darrow here. Hey, Steve. This again from the Bill Whittle members only website. Non-members can watch videos there, but only members get to comment on these things. And Steve Darrow, our good friend, says, I would like to know more about your and Natasha's trips to the shooting range. How often do you go? What are your favorite weapons? Do you score your sessions? Any other tidbits you would like to share? That's a refreshing change. We have gone a long time without shooting. We've gone almost a year. We went back to an indoor range, I want to say about a month ago. She's still a much better shot than I am. And I'm not only does that not bother me, I'm actually really proud of that. Last time we went to the indoor range, she brought her Buckmark 22 caliber competition pistol because she outshoots kind of a stock pistol. And she's putting little tiny holes in little tiny targets a long way away. And I brought the hand artillery because I hadn't fired the 45 for a while. That's a big, nasty, mean gun. It's not fun. For me, it's not fun. It's just impressive. And I just like the look of it. I think the 45 ACP 1911 45 is just the gun. It's the gun. It's good as it gets. But it goes boom, and it's not so much the kick. It's got a bit of a kick, but that's not what bothers me. It's just very hard for me to stay on target with it because it's just so bloody big. However, the one thing I did do there was, and this gives me some idea of what I'm going through when I actually shoot the 45. I bought a box of very expensive ammunition. I want to say it was maybe 12, or maybe it was 20 individual rounds. It was something like $22 or something. But it had, they were tracers. There was a red tracer that came out of the back of that bullet. And I was just curious to see what that looked like. We were in indoor range, and I fired it again and again and again. And I kept turning to Natasha. I said, "Did you see anything?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "I didn't see anything. I did not see it." I might have seen it outdoors where I'd have a little more time to follow the bullet, but on an indoor range, that round is gone in a fraction of a second. I didn't see it until somebody else fired the gun. But when I did see it, it was awfully cool. It's not a real tracer because the tracer doesn't stay with it the whole way. It's just kind of looks kind of like a red laser beam that comes out, but it was pretty cool, but I was a little disappointed. Anyway, I think I would like to get something smaller and lighter, maybe even a 22. I don't know, something cool. Although I guess that's a contradiction in terms. But the 45 is just a damn nice thing to have under the bed, and the AR-15 is a nice thing to have not too far away from the 45. But I was so impressed with her when she started shooting. I get more impressed with her every day. Yeah, the Walther's kind of cool, but we'll see. Oh, wait a minute. Looks like I may have picked the wrong page because Scott asked somebody to repost it. And here's a link to apparently the actual page. Okay, let's see here. John Armstrong. Still a dummy after all these years. How do I sign in, or sign up and participate in the Stratosphere Lounge? Hey, John, not a dummy at all. We move around, and as the worst produced show on the internet, nothing that we do is easy. And if we find out that people are doing something with a fair amount of simplicity, needless to say, we tear that down and try to find a way to make it more complicated and unpleasant. Actually, we do the show live. I think Scott often posts a link to the Twitch stream. He did in the comment below this on the website. And if you go to the the Twitch stream when the show's running live, which is 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific on Thursdays, then you will see all of our good friends here making comments live. And if you want to just register there, there's a little icon up there. Just give yourself a screen name, and you can be there just like everybody else. But yeah, don't feel bad about that, because it's like I got to tell you, it reminds me of a kind of a cliche that has always annoyed me, and that's like when people say this restaurant is the best kept secret in L.A. If you're proud of that, you're not doing your job. Anybody who advertises that we're the best kept secret in L.A. has done a pretty crummy job of advertising up to now. And if they become successful, then they won't be the best kept secret in L.A. You don't want to keep a thing like this secret. We managed to do it through sheer incompetence. When I say we, I mean me. But yeah, we're the best kept secret on the internet. And I don't think there's anything that I could blame that on other than my own incompetence. So let's go back to the page again, then we'll come back to Facebook. Let's see. This is from Buck S. It says, if you look at shows heading to the right, one of them is a link, TSL live stream. Look at the shows heading on the right, sorry. I'm sorry, he's responding to John, my bad. Ralph Capero wants to know if there's a theme for the upcoming show. There isn't, because we're in it. However, anybody who has a Ron Swanson icon is good with me. For some strange reason, I just ended up watching his greatest hits again. I watch him every 5-6 months. And Ron Swanson on Parks and Recreation, I think is maybe the greatest character in television history. I genuinely mean it. The more I see of him, the better I like it. And I always wonder about that when I look at his greatest hits, if for those of you not familiar with it, he plays just a fanatical libertarian in government who hates government, likes to see it do as little as possible. But I often wonder about how the writers who put the liberal writers who put the words in the liberal actor's mouth, Nick Offerman, I think. I wonder, I know that when they write the stuff that he does, I know on some level they think it's parody, but I got to tell you, there is, it's just so wise. I mean, it's just, maybe that's just obviously my preference, but there's just so much wisdom comes out of him, and he's so cool. He's just so cool. Forget what somebody asked me if you have any allergies, and he said something like vegetables and weak men. It's just again and again and again and again and again. You give me all the bacon and eggs that you have. He's great. He's a great character. He's a strong character. All the women are attracted to him. He's constantly dumping on Aziz Ansari, and he's just epic. He's an epic character. It is the Archie Bunker effect, says Eric Blake. He's right. It's once again liberals trying to write conservatives as caricatures, but the values are so sound that when you find somebody who's like a caricature of a conservative, they sound like a super conservative, and people like those guys. And I just I just adore the guy, the character, not the actor. The character is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Just go to YouTube and search for Ron Swanson's greatest hits. You will hear some of the greatest comedy writing in history, and it's all on our side. All of it's on our side. Every single one of it is mocking liberals, mocking vegetarians, mocking feminists, mocking pajama boy. It's bloody marvelous is what it is. It's really, really good. And if you haven't seen it, again, you can save yourself some time. Just go to YouTube and search for Ron Swanson. There are lots of people who put together his greatest hits, and I'm just tempted to play it for the next hour, and I'll just go home and get some sleep. It's phenomenally good writing and phenomenally good acting. What Nick does with that character is just, he's so real. He's just absolutely 100% believable. My favorite part about Ron Swanson is he's always so angry and always so severe and stuff, but every now and then the actor will give him just a little bit of a, like, you see a little glint in his eyes, like a little hidden smile. He's just like, he's impish when when he's talking about being able to hold up government and and slow it down every way possible. He was talking about one of his employees. He said, I once worked with a guy for 3 years, never knew his name. Best employee we ever had. We still don't talk sometimes. That's just brilliant writing. So anyway, yeah, I'm a huge fan of that character, and I'm a fan of all of these right-wing characters that left-wingers create to mock, and all they end up doing is mocking themselves. It's just, I think this is what I was trying to get at a second ago. I think secretly inside, when liberal writers write for Ron Swanson, for example, or Archie Bunker, or Alec Baldwin's character on 30 Rock, or any of the others, Denny Crane and all the rest. I think that what's coming out is that writer is actually funny because that is what he probably believes deep down inside. To his credit, the most savage takedown of a liberal I've ever seen in the pop culture was delivered by Seth MacFarlane to himself, literally to himself. He did all the voices in the conversation. He had Quagmire just turn on Brian, the dog, who's the ultra-liberal, and just for 30, 40 seconds, just destroys him. And I admire somebody who's willing to at least do that and not be so ideologically bound. Speaking of which, I'm going to take one from me. Somebody sent me a link to this Budweiser commercial starring Charlize Theron. I don't know if any of you have seen that. There's a new Bud in town. Charlize Theron is sitting at a dive bar by herself, just casually drinking her Budweiser, as she often does in the real world, sitting alone in a dive bar drinking beer. And somebody, of course, some male who's simply just a, knuckle-dragging idiot, makes a couple of noises. So she goes over, whips him in pool, then whips him in darts, and then beats him in an arm wrestling contest. And then she goes back and sits down again, and I thought to myself, well, this is about as clear as it gets, This is basically what they're doing in all of the movies. They are, somebody, somehow, has decided that it would be good for Budweiser to kind of exercise this feminist fantasy. And the feminist fantasy deserves some exaggeration. And no, I didn't actually. I've got to get this thing written. But one of the things I want to pick up with the firewalls when I get this thing done into bed is I want to talk about how I believe that it is impossible for feminists to write, or modern left-wingers, progressives of any kind. I think it's impossible for them to write good female characters. It's such an irony to me. They've waited their whole lives, we want to write women leads and empowerment stuff. So finally they get their chance to do it. And it's garbage. It's garbage. And it's garbage because, like the Chinese government, these people are so unbelievably insecure these social justice warriors and feminists, they're so unbelievably insecure that it is beyond their ability to have their female characters make a mistake, be wrong, be nasty, have flaws, and uh, and so since they're unwilling to make Rey in Star Wars ever have to learn how to do anything, she just has all the power automatically, and that's what it was about the Charlize Theron thing. She has all the power automatically just because, and it's another example of the self-esteem movement. That commercial and Rey and all the rest of it is an example of this kind of magical thinking where you see these women saying women can be the kind of warriors that men can be, and there are some very good, well, certainly some excellent women pilots on the battlefield. They just don't have the physical strength to keep up with men. That's all there is to it. But what's so interesting to me is that all of the women and all of the soy boys who are promoting this idea that women are not only as kick-ass as men, but more. What's so interesting to me about this is that all of the people that are promoting this, none of them go to the military. None of them. Don't you find that odd? Don't you find it odd that all of the people who are screaming the loudest about more women in STEM and science, technology, engineering, and math, do you find it strange that all of the people who are calling the loudest for women in STEM tend to be women, none of whom are in STEM? Find that odd? I do. I find it odd. And what I find out of it is that this is just a form of wish fulfillment, and it is extremely infantile and extremely childish, and the more of it they do, the more ridiculous they make themselves. So if that's what Charlize Theron, we'll just say her character. If this is what Charlize Theron's ideal of the ideal woman is somebody who can just get up off of a bar stool after drinking by herself, walk across the bar, beat the guy who's played pool all his life at pool, beat the guy who's played darts all his life at darts, beat the guy who makes a living as an arm wrestler at arm wrestling, and then simply go back and do it. No cost, no effort, no failure, no nothing. It's worse than stupid. It's boring. Boring. And it does a disservice to the women who are actually out there as engineers and warriors, because they don't behave like this. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the Captain Marvel is another one of these Mary Sues, these ultimately powerful people who has nothing to slow them down. The big battle at the end, the guy's raving and ranting. She just goes, throws him into a mountain half a mile away. The end. Oh, okay. Well, that must have given whoever wrote that a tremendous jolly sense of yes. But it's just junk. It's junk. And so this is what you're stuck with. You have this infantile fantasy, not only of being able to do all of these things well, but do them all better than men, and do them without any effort at all. None. Nothing. And this is what they're putting into the minds of young girls, which is destructive, and into the minds of young boys, which is worse. So we'll see. Back to Facebook page for a while here. Your host is really starting to feel the drag here. I've been up pretty much all day for 48 hours now. I'm just pounding this thing into the ground. All right, so let's see. Dave Crean, on the Facebook page. How much influence does China have on the U.S. film industry? I'm not going to read the rest of the question, just to pause and say all of it. I remember a few years ago how the Chinese government forced the Red Dawn remake to change the protagonist from China to North Korean-led coalition force. Does it have more of a say now since this purchase of the AMC theater chain? It's not just the AMC theater chain, David. The AMC theater chain just shows what's produced. I've covered this ground before. I don't want to spend too much time on going over stuff I've gone over frequently before, but sometimes it helps to just step back and take a look at the whole picture. Not only did we get into trouble financially, and not only did we start making bad movies, but we actually began to lose the country as a result of a very obscure piece of American history. Jeremy Boring pointed this out to me, and I thought, the second I heard it, I thought, my God, he's right. And that strange little piece of legislation was the legislation that decided that movie studios could not own their own movie theaters, that was a form of monopoly. Paramount used to make Paramount movies, and they'd own Paramount theaters, and they'd show them in Paramount theaters. And so the big brains who make up the laws said, oh, that's no good. We can't have that. So they basically legally prohibited the people that make the movies from being the same people that show the movies. And what that did was it disconnected the movie makers from the American revenue stream. No matter what they may have thought, and there were a great many communists all throughout the history of Hollywood, enormous numbers, huge numbers of just really barking mad communists. But up until that decision had been made, they had to write pro-American stuff, because if they didn't, nobody would watch it. And if nobody watched it, they'd be out of a job. So you get movies like, and I'm certainly not accusing, oh my gosh, flew right out of my head. I so hate it when that happens. Frank Capra. I'm not accusing Frank Capra of being communist by any means, but people would make Frank Capra type movies because that's what people wanted to see. And so Hollywood had to be beholden to pop culture and be respectful of Americans, because that's where the dollars were. Their hearts may have not been there. Many of them were, but many of them weren't. But that's where the dollars were, and that's what they had to produce. So along comes this decision, and it took 30 or 40 years. But basically what happened was it said, now you guys who are making movies don't have to make your money from the American public that's buying tickets in your theaters. Now you can make your money worldwide. You can do it on pre-sales, and you can sell, bits of it in Indonesia and all the rest of it, and so on. And what began to happen was sources of money began to appear that wasn't studio money. Some of these were shady, some of them weren't. Some of them were just regular investment opportunities. A lot of it was wildcatting Texas guys who decided to go for it, and all the rest of it. And so these movies began to drift away from the culture, and they started to think they could lead the culture when before all they did was follow the culture. And so you've got all these left-wingers now who've been given their heads and are able to run around and do whatever they want to, and they make more and more progressively anti-American movies. And then as the U.S. domestic box office falls and the viewership of the Academy Awards goes through the floor and all the rest of it, then they find that there are people who are willing to pay for anti-American movies, and it turns out those people are China, Russia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iran. $100 million or $200 or $300 million for a tentpole movie that destroys Americans' confidence in themselves, and especially if it can undo existing pride the way that The Last Jedi undid Luke Skywalker, then $300 million drop in the bucket for the Chinese. It's the best investment they could make, and that's how it happens. Eric wants to know if the studios were allowed to own the theaters again, could all that be reversed? Yes. Now you're going to say, well, how can you undo the law? But certainly it would be possible. There's a procedure out there called four-walling. And four-walling is the poor man's distribution method. If you got a film that you made and you can't get a major or even a minor to distribute your film, in other words, buy it from you, show it, and keep most of the profits, virtually all of the profits, you can do something called four-walling. And Roger Corman was a master of this. Four-walling means that I've just made a movie, let's say, for $1 million, and for another $500,000, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to rent the theater. I'm going to rent the movie theater from the guy. I'm going to pay him this amount of money per day, and I'll run my movie in that theater. and I have to do my own advertising and all the rest of it. It's not unheard of. It's not common, but it's certainly not unheard of. I know they four-walled the Arroyo as an example. So with very modest resources, just a couple $1 million, I could go out and make a great science fiction movie that is about nothing but people with guns trying to, take out some bad guys from other planets without the help of the government. And then for a little additional money, I could rent a number of theaters, run the movie, and do something that used to be called a platform release. And it's called a platform because that's what it looked like. It looked like an Olympic platform, you kind of inverted one. You would start, you'd rent, or in the case of a distributor, you'd put a movie that you thought had some real juice to it. You'd open it in I don't know, 50 screens, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago maybe. And then you would use the money that you got from those limited releases and take that money and then release it wider. And you'd it's like trying to start a fire with with a flint and tinder. You would try to ride this buzz wave and bootstrap yourself up to a pretty wide release. And people who know how to do it can do it. You have to have a good product because that whole thing survives on word of mouth, and bad word of mouth platform releases killed. Which is why, and this is another thing, the economics have changed, and since the economics changed, the content changes. Another reason that movies are so bad, they're just badly written, is because the system is set up now for a film to make its money back on the first weekend, at least its cost. That's the idea. And so once you began to have these, instead of opening on 200 screens or something, when a film opened on 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 screens across America on the same day, that film could basically be just blank leader. It could just be the boop, boop for 90 minutes. And by the time people found out what a toad this was, it was too late. They already had their money. And this is what we see all the time. They make these movies, they hype the hell out of them, they do incredible, great trailers and promotional campaigns. You get yourself all hot and bothered to see it. And if you don't go during the first day or two, sooner or later you hear from your friends who say, good God, man, save yourself the money, don't do it. But the fact that you can make that much money on an opening weekend means that people make movies that are just junk because they can get away with them. So to answer your question, yes, it would be possible to make a film and then go out, the same production company, go out and four-wall it. I would not be the owner of the theater, but I would be able to connect the revenues from American audiences with the people that made the movie. And if we had not done this, much mischief could have been avoided. Okay, back to Facebook. Let's see what we got here. My gosh. That's another one from David Crean, and I just like it because it's interesting. What do you think of CBS reviving the Twilight Zone? And do you have a favorite episode from the original series? Those are great questions. Is it Jordan Peele who's redoing it? It doesn't matter who's redoing it. They've tried to redo it several times. They have given it a shot many, many times. And the only problem with the reboots of the Twilight Zone is that they don't have Rod Serling in them, and you can't divorce them. The Twilight Zone. Rod Serling wasn't a host for hire, and Rod Serling wasn't just a writer on some of the best episodes. It was Rod Serling's baby, start to finish, and to say that we're going to make a Twilight Zone without Rod Serling is to simply say we're going to try and ape Rod Serling, and what you'll end up with is somebody who's not Rod Serling pretending to be Rod Serling. And it's just, and Mr. Settle says it's all horrible SJW nonsense, which we knew it would be. The Twilight Zone was brilliant, not only because Rod Serling was brilliant and because of the vibe that he brought to it. Rod Serling, there's a reason. It's not an accident that every single episode of The Twilight Zone started out with Rod Serling talking right at the audience. It's not an accident. I'm not aware that any other show has ever done that, by the way. It's like Gene Roddenberry getting out in front of every single episode of Star Trek and basically telling the audience, here's what it's going to be about. Peele's a talented guy, funny guy. Key and Peele, was it? On Comedy Central. Those two guys were brilliant sketch comedy guys. Brilliant. But again, everything had to be political. But my God, they were great. So you've got a show that began with the creator. He wasn't the writer, wasn't the host, wasn't the producer. He was all of those things, but he was the creator of the show. And he would come out and he would set up the episode. And by the time he was finished with that, was it a 60-second introduction? Less sometimes. By the time he was finished with that, you were already in the right headspace. You were already there. His presence, if you really think, I've never really gone down this road before, but if you think about it, Rod Serling's ability, they do the opening scene, a little something or other, and then they do a swoosh pan, and there he'd be. He'd be up against the cigarette machine, or he'd be standing, he just appeared. He magically appeared. And so that alone, just the fact that he's here, he's gone, that alone was spooky and supernatural. And nobody realizes this. As epilogues as well, as Astronaut points out. It puts you in the mood, and you knew that you were about to go on a ride, and you knew where that place was going to take you. Now you could copy that kind of reversal story, that kind of half an hour reversal, which even the mediocre ones were really superb, and the great ones were just some of the greatest stories ever told, ever. You can copy that, but if you don't get introduced to it, if Rod Serling doesn't come out at the beginning of that show and escort you to your seat with his flashlight, then it's just gonna be another science fiction story. It's not gonna be the Twilight Zone, because the Twilight Zone starts with Rod Serling, and that's all there is to it. This is like this idea of having a female James Bond. You can have a female named James Bond. I know her name isn't James Bond, but she's going to be James Bond, and you can call her James Bond, or you can call her Jane Bond, or you can call her whatever you want to, but you are just essentially taking the credibility of an existing character and stapling it onto something that it's not, and it's not going to work. And it's a sign further of laziness and venality, that they don't just make a great story. Why not just make a great story about this? If you want a black female spy, why don't you just write a story that's about a black female spy, and don't try to convince me that this is James Bond, or try to fig leaf it? It's not really James. Of course it is. Okay, so Serling was amazing, and let's face it. I mean, he was quite a bizarre guy. I'm not talking about his real life. I don't know anything about his real life. His on-camera persona, his delivery was just unique. Is the nicest word I can think of. I used to be able to do a passable Rod Serling, but he'd get out there and submitted for your approval. One Mr. Miller, who's about to take a trip into oddness and obsolescence. Accompanying him on that fateful journey is the mesmerizing sound of the Twilight Zone. I'm in. I'm ready to go for it. I don't see any way they can copy that. About my favorite episodes, I'd be hard-pressed to pick one, but I guess I could. You know, it's not even my favorite episode, but every time I think about the Twilight Zone, this is the episode I think of. Always. And it's the episode with Agnes Moorehead, who plays a crazy old woman out in the country, all by herself out in this log cabin. And these little aliens appear, and they're trying to kill her. And naturally enough, she's just an old woman, and she's trying to defend herself against these little robotic kind of creatures. And so she's finally able to knock a couple of them out, and then she goes up to her attic and finds the flying saucer that these little creatures came from and smashes it to atoms. And you're thinking, thank God she's gotten rid of these horrible monsters. And as you pan around to see the other side of the saucer, it's got United States Air Force on the side. And you hear a little bit of I forget what it is exactly, some kind of radio dialogue saying, we've lost contact with our mission to so-and-so. It turned out that those little robots were American astronauts, and that she was some kind of giant monster. And that's the reversal. That's what the Twilight Zone is. The Twilight Zone is 28 minutes of setup to give you 10 seconds of something that you'll never forget, ever. I had a chance to show an episode to a millennial friend of mine, and I decided to show the episode where the woman goes in to have facial plastic surgery to correct her horrible deformity. And the entire episode takes place kind of in dark areas. You know, we can't let her see too much light, because if there's light, then, you know, it'll really disturb her. And so everybody's kind of in shadow. And then they finally getting ready to take the bandages off on the final attempt to make this woman's face right. And the bandages come off, and the woman underneath is gorgeous. And you finally get to see the doctors and the nurses, and the doctors and nurses are hideous. They're just hideous. And you just go, oh my God. Was it called The Eye of the Beholder? I think it was. It was called The Eye of the Beholder. Beauty's in the Eye of the Beholder. And in a world where everybody is ugly, and ugliness is accepted by everybody, a person who's beautiful is a freak. And then towards the end, I remember at the very, very end, another one of these guys, one of these people come in, and they treat him like a leper, and he talks like a leper. This incredibly handsome guy, and he comes in, he says, "Don't worry, they've made a place for us. We live out of sight so that we don't disturb other people, and we'll come with us, and we can go live on this island and not be quite as ashamed of ourselves." And it blew her mind, and that's because she'd never been exposed to the Twilight Zone before. But once you have had that experience once or twice, it's really it, right? I mean, there's nothing to add. It is 28 minutes of exposition for a 5-second or a 10-second, oh my God moment. And then you realize that everything, it's a paradigm shift. You realize that everything that you were, this is the genius of Serling and the Twilight Zone. It's the actual genius of it. Pretty much every one of these stories, certainly the great ones, grab you because they set you up to root for a certain side or a certain person, and at the end you find out, no, the person who you thought was the enemy was actually the good person. The person you thought was a good person was actually the enemy, and it was it's just uncanny, brilliant. I have to tell you, one of my favorite episodes, and I like this episode because of the subtlety of the writing. The Terror at 30,000 feet with Bill Shatner and the gremlin out on the wing tearing the plane apart, that was brilliant. The cornfield with Billy Mooney, who I've met and had a chance to thank for his work, that was brilliant. Lots and lots of them. But one of the ones I like the most is a very subtle one, and it's not. This is more of a redemption story. He did those sometimes too. Sometimes instead of a twist, the twist would be the redemption. I remember the one with Mickey Rooney, who wanted to be he was a jockey, and he'd thrown some races, and he wanted to get back in the business, but and Rooney, needless to say, just knocks us out of the park. He's just a little guy, and all his life he wanted to be big. And so he goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, he's huge. They built a set, and then they built that exact set scaled down by like 10%. Exactly the same. So now, after you've spent the first half of the show looking at Mickey Rooney walking around this apartment, now you're looking at the exact same apartment. Everything's in the same place. But Mickey Rooney is huge. And your brain tells you, well, he's just enormous now. He's bigger. Now he can't be a jockey anymore. And so it's, be careful what you ask for kind of story. But one of my favorite episodes, and certainly my favorite in the writing, is the episode with William Shatner where he and his newlywed wife are traveling in a car, and they break down in a small town, and it's going to take hours to fix the car. So they go to a diner, and inside the diner is this kind of novelty thing where you put in a penny, you press the button, and out comes some sort of mystic prediction. And that is, I'm speaking as a professional here, if you'll pardon my crapulence. That writing is magnificent. And the reason it's magnificent is because when you listen to it, you can clearly see why Shatner and his wife would believe that this thing is predicting the future. In other words, the things that are coming out of Zoltron, was it, I think, or something? Things that are coming out of this creature on a little printed piece of paper, in fact, do seem to be predicting the future. And he's convinced that this thing can predict the future. But the brilliance of that writing is, once you've seen the show and you know what happens, if you go back and look at it again, you'll find that the predictions that are made could have been completely random predictions. They just got spat out of a machine because that whole episode was about superstition. Shatner's character was a guy who believed in luck. He had a rabbit's foot and all. All of it was just to break you out of superstition. And then you think, man, is it going to kill him? Is it going to destroy him? That's what often happens in these stories. But in this particular story, it was actually a very elegant ending too. He's got his wife, and he's so hooked on the idea, a guy who believes so much in luck and fortune and signs and all the rest of it. Here he's got a connection to God. He's talking to the future. And this is all he's ever wanted, really. He wants some certainty about what's going to happen. That's the kind of guy he was, a nervous guy. And he ended up being kind of enveloped in kind of Rod Serling's grace somehow, because that story was about his ability to force himself to walk away from something that was clearly destroying his life. There was never a moment where it was revealed that it wasn't telling the future. In fact, as far as Shatner was concerned, it absolutely was telling the future. That's a nice thing to be able to do. But he finally realizes that their obsession with it is killing him and his wife, and so he simply walks away from something he very much wants. That's a powerful, powerful morality lesson. And the point is hammered home when Shatner and his young wife are saying, let's just get out of here, honey. This is just killing us. Let's get out of here. And as he gets up, he puts a tip down on the table, walking out, and as he's walking out, this older couple's walking in. The guy hasn't shaved, and they're covered with sweat, and he's got a handful of pennies, and he walks up to the thing, and she says, okay, now asking about this, and you realize this is what would have happened to him. This is precisely what would have happened to him if he had stayed, but he didn't. So instead of being stuck in this living hell of superstition, he's a free man. That's just how do you top that? I mean, but the writing, think about how difficult that would have to be. First of all, you'd have to come up with a plot where events in the future could be predicted by a piece of paper that maybe held 5-6 words on it. That's number one. Number two, they have to be things that could be believable, small things that could actually be believable. Number three, they had to be ambiguous enough. In other words, those cards could never say a blonde man is going to walk through the door at 4:15 p.m. They were ambiguous, and finally, and much the hardest part of it is they had to be feasibly random things, because the whole point is that luck doesn't exist and fate doesn't exist. That's the point they're trying to make. This obsession with superstition and so on is terrible. And so the suggestions had to have the appearance of being generated by random after the fact, because after the fact, you have to be able to see how much, this is the point, how much he read into these ambiguous statements, how much he read into those predictions. Brilliant. See if this is so much fun. I'm trying to think if there's anything else comes to mind right away. Lots of images of them come to me, but nothing with the power of that Agnes Moorehead one. For some reason, that one just never, ever left me. There was another show like that called The Outer Limits. I don't know what's going on here. I really don't know what's going on. Outer Limits, I thought, was far inferior. However, I saw as a little boy, a young boy, 5, 6 years old, really interested in space stuff and, Lost in Space and all that stuff. And my dad told me that there was going to be a movie out called Robinson Crusoe on Mars, and it's like vibrating, to go see this thing. Adam West was in that movie. So there was one Outer Limits episode, and as usual, it was astronauts crashed on a planet, and there was a sort of a giant sea of sand out there and rocks, and inside the sand lived kind of like a sandworm from Dune. Much cheesier, obviously, but still. I remember watching that and how the guys had to go from rock to rock to rock to try to get away from this thing. And I remember watching that thinking, that is just bloody terrifying. It is scary as hell. This is the kind of thing that I want to be an astronaut for, because I want to figure out how to get around things like this. And if I have to use my trusty blaster, then that's what I'll do. It went right through me. I just loved it. Every now and then when you're young, something hits you the right way and it just stays with you. I think I mentioned once before the most amazing movie I ever saw in my life in terms of what I remember as my experience in the theater. The most amazing movie ever made was called Battle Beneath the Earth. Starts out with an obviously crazy man on the streets of Vegas, I want to say, and he's listening to the cement. He says, "Don't you hear him down there? You can hear him, the Chinese." And the whole movie was about how the Chinese had built this laser tank, and this laser tank was boring tunnels between China and the U.S., and they were going to invade. It's no big deal, just kind of come across the Pacific underwater. They were going to invade, and they had this kind of really sophisticated kind of laser tank, so the Americans have to throw together something, and it's kind of chuck a laser onto a Jeep. And then, sure enough, there's a battle beneath the earth, and one of the scenes had this Chinese kind of Mandarin, really kind of a kind of a Dr. Wu kind of guy in military outfit, and he gets into this little container and closes it, and then he's just pneumatically shot back to China and back again, like he's a bunch of receipts in one of those bank teller things, drive-in bank thing. Wow, that's the most amazing movie ever made. And then I saw it again. I looked it up on YouTube. I don't know, 10 years ago now, maybe, something. And I was utterly convinced that somebody had remade the movie and remade it much worse. But sure enough, it was the same movie. I used to think my Aunt Marty's house was the biggest structure in the world as well. And then I get back to that as an adult, and I look around and it's unbelievable. But yeah, that's about it. Guys, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to call it a night. I definitely am just about out of juice here, and I'm going to. I've gotten this thing finally behind me. Going to record it tomorrow morning, and I have to be in here bright and early tomorrow morning to meet Scott for recording another Build Now episode. So I would really like to get a little sleep, and then I've got 6 more episodes to go. I was able to do an interview yesterday. Again, not really widely publicized, but I did an interview yesterday. I don't think I've ever had so much fun. Not just in an interview. I just don't know that I've ever had more just sheer kind of fun as I had yesterday. I interviewed Peter Robinson, who does Uncommon Knowledge at National Review. And Peter Robinson was the guy who wrote Reagan's Mr. Gorbachev, Tear Down This Wall speech. He changed history. He really did. And we not only talked about how he got that speech, but we talked about the whole Cold War. And I started this thing out by saying, Peter, I've heard the Cold War described in terms of military terms. I've heard it in terms of economic terms. Heard it in terms of political terms. But the one thing that I never hear is a discussion of the morality gap, of the difference between these two sides. Cold War is always treated as if it's Team A and Team B, red team and blue teams, Coke versus Pepsi, and no one ever talks about the indescribable chasm between the Americans and the Russians in terms of morality. When I was writing the script, I remember writing Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, personally signed 40,000 death warrants. There were millions of people killed, but he signed 40,000 ones in person, including virtually all of his family and virtually all of his friends. Dwight Eisenhower, President of the United States, once got so angry he threw a golf club at an aide. And if you think that those things are equivalent, you are very, 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 very ill. Very ill. And I just piled on, Head of the Soviet spy agency, NKVD, Lavrentiy Beria, raped no less than 70 women. He would drive down the streets of Moscow late at night. He'd find somebody who he thought was attractive, and then his agents would go and take this person, literally snatch her off the street, take her back to his official residence, and he would rape them there. And many of these girls were 14, 15 years old. Some of them he murdered. One of the people who survived it went on to be an actress, a famous Russian actress, and she said that when he got there, he just looked at her and said, "Scream or not scream, doesn't matter. Nobody's going to hear you, and I don't care." So that's the chief of the Soviet intelligence agency, a guy who had raped scores and scores, probably hundreds of women, and murdered significant number, dozens of them probably, with his own hands. And the American spy chief, Allen Dulles, had a consensual affair with the Queen of Greece. And again, you can't understand that story. You can't understand the history unless you understand that. No one talks about it. No one. So I led off with that, and from that point on, we were just on a roll, And it was great to talk to somebody who had worked so closely with Reagan, and who was able to explain all of the things that Reagan was doing behind the scenes. What his motivations were, and one of the things that we kind of came to agree on, it's not that it was news or anything, it was just kind of interesting. We both got there independently, coming at it from different ways, and that is that Truman was the president at the beginning of the Cold War, and Reagan was the president at the end of it. And the one thing those two people had in common were they were not the products of they weren't lawyers, they didn't go to Harvard. I don't think Truman went to college. Reagan went to Aurora College. None of them had that kind of blue-blooded Brahmin sort of upbringing. And because they didn't get tainted by that whole foggy bottom, State Department, professional diplomats, hail fellow, well met kind of thing, because they didn't have those blinders on, Reagan and Truman were the only ones who really saw just what they were up against. Not who they were up against, what they were up against. The interview's not out yet, by the way. We just shot it yesterday. I think Daily Wire said they might release it in one piece. I suggested they use it to promote the show. But again, I don't want to go too far out in the woods here until they do an actual, some kind of promotion. But in any event, I'm quite sure they'll do the whole interview, which was an hour. And I've never had that much fun, honestly. I can't explain why. I think probably what it was, and I think it was kind of this feedback loop, where I finally found somebody who not only knew more about something I was interested in than I did, but was actually there firsthand. That was really exciting. And I suspect for Peter, if I had to guess, it was probably the only time he'd ever been interviewed by somebody who understood that material well enough to ask him questions that he'd never answered before, or in some cases never even thought of before. And that was very flattering for me, and historic and memorable, and I had a wonderful time. I just think he's a great, 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 great guy. I did not ask him what a vapor barrier is, Steve Darrow, but I believe the vapor barrier is that part of the wall between the inside and the outside part of a building that prevents moisture from flowing in or something like that. I remember that back from my construction days. Anyway, sorry to have to bug out after only an hour and a half, but I'm bugged, and I really need to get some sleep before I record this thing tomorrow. And hopefully, and certainly, I will be back on the horse then. I've got to deliver pretty much an episode a week. It's a lot of writing. Just part 4 alone was 9,000 words. That's, I don't know, 5 or 6 firewalls, something like that. Anyway, as soon as they're done, I will be able to get back on that horse. Right now, it's just overwhelming. It's just a crushing kind of a psychological thing that's hanging over me. But I'm having fun doing it, and we'll certainly promote it. And we'd like to hope that we can start to build up an evidence for a kind of build up an audience for a sort of historical podcast kind of thing that I would do with them from time to time. Eric Blake wants to know if we can do a movie show next time. I'd love to. I just usually forget. Somebody wants to ping me about it. That'd be great. But until then, I think I'm gonna cheese it. So once again, this show's made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com who keep the lights open, keep the doors lit, and who allow me to take my wife to Mexico and show my stepdaughter the best birthday of her life by far. By far. Just the entire 5 days I was there, and she's still there. She'll come back. She and her daughter have been together. She'll come back on Saturday. The entire time, my stepdaughter was just on the verge of tears. She simply couldn't believe that somebody was doing something for her like that. And I was able to do that because many of you out there are parting with $9.95 a month, and I wanted you to know, as I always try to let you know, that it means the world to me, and we're very grateful. So on behalf of me and my wife and my stepdaughter, I have a little family now. Thanks very much for the support. And if you're not a member, we certainly could use it. Anyway, Trevor wants to know if he can borrow $10. I said, the problem is, Trevor, all I've got is hundreds. I mean, I've just got, I don't have room for the 20s or the 10s in my wallet. My wallet's it's just like this big, just stuffed with brand new $100 bills, and I'm afraid I can't help you, pal. Anyway, that'll do it for this Stratosphere Lounge. I have a few thumbnails I have to make, and then I have to hit hit the road, Jack, and I'm not coming back no more until tomorrow morning. Okay, good seeing everybody. Take care of yourselves out there, and we will see you next week right here on the Stratosphere Lounge. Losers.